There's been a bit of a running theme in my message section and my comments for this podcast that I get too many actors on this show. I was really, really thrilled when you said that you would come on the show. And then
knowing I was an actor.
And then I Googled you.
So
and I was like, I can't believe I've got another actor on the show.
So funny.
Do you still identify as an actor?
That's such a good question. Yes, although I don't have time to do all the jobs I have to do, never mind then go perform in a play. But I went to see something at Tower Theatre the other day, which is a kind of Amdram theatre in London, but full of professional actors who aren't working. So I guess I've gone into this Amdram, but the standard is really high. And I was watching it and I was like, oh, I miss it so much.
Once you've been on stage,
right?
It stays with you, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And whenever I go and watch theatre, I'm exactly the same as you. I love it. It's amazing. But there's a part of me that's just like, I would give anything
totally
to be on that stage.
But I even went as far as looking on their website for how long are rehearsals, how do you do it? And then my boyfriend was just looking at it. He was like, you don't have an evening off. How are you going to rehearse a play and perform in a play? I was like, you're right. But I have no doubt I'll go back.
You are, because you are everywhere. You're really, really busy.
It's pretty busy.
It's one of the things I really love about you. In fact, and Carla, and actually a lot of the sort of prominent figures in the Green Party is you're really visible.
Right.
You don't seem afraid. In fact, scrap that. You seem to actively seek out conversation and interaction with the demographic and with the electorate, which I think is it's really refreshing. Because one of the issues that I think we have in this country, it certainly seems to me, and I know because I speak to a lot of people. I work with a lot of young people, for example, and I speak to them about politics, and I speak to them about, are you voting in the local election? Who's your candidate? And there's a real disconnect, and I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that they don't feel like they have any sort of connection to the politicians, and I really, really love that about you.
It's literally my favorite thing to do.
Is it?
And it's really interesting. There's something I only discovered it recently called a parasocial relationship, very technical term.
Oh.
Apparently that is people who know you online or through your work and feel like they know you, but they don't necessarily know you. And you can tell the quality of it by when they approach you, how do they approach you? And I'm really it's one of my favorite things about the work I do. People come up to me all the time like they know me really, really well. And I've never met them in my life. And you then have a much deeper conversation than you might have with a stranger, because I guess a barrier already isn't there because they know your values. You're trying to work out theirs very quickly, but it's a really magic part of the job is, and not just people who agree with you. Sometimes when people come up to you to tell you strongly that they disagree with you, and then you're able to have that discussion.
That's really valuable.
And not in an online space where you can actually look someone in the eye, work out where they're coming from, and realize you're probably not that different. There's just a different worldview or a different history based on this topic.
Yeah, it feels like a Green Party thing. Would I be right in thinking that there is a kind of, maybe it's unspoken, but there is very much a view across the Greens that we are going to be visible, we are going to be out there, we are going to be taking interviews and answering difficult questions. Is that something that...
Yeah, I think it's one of two things. I think the thing that's less flattering to us is it's kind of out of necessity. We know the mainstream media often just ignore us or don't want to platform us. So what are you going to do with your time? You just get out there and talk to people and bypass the kind of what I would say is often the right-wing agenda and actually go, let's meet people in their communities and be there. But also, yeah, it's absolutely in our values. We're a completely democratic party, so it's one member, one vote. Any member can kind of have a feed into how policy looks. And I think it would be odd if we were doing that and at the same time not meeting people. So yes, more than anything, if I've ever got spare time, what I actively seek to do is go to a community, particularly a community I don't know so well or I don't know something about or have disagreements with, to go, okay, let's listen. Of course I'll talk. It's not like I'm going to stand there silently, but actually listening becomes a more important bit than speaking. Yeah,
it comes across, mate. It really, really does. From the outside looking in, it's one of the things that I think I'm most proud of as a Green Party member now, is that my party are out there actually on the ground doing work that I think is really great. My local candidate is amazing. He's a biochemist. He's only been a member of the Greens for about 12 months, I think, and he looks like a pirate.
Okay. He's very on brand.
He wears a bandana. He's fabulous. I haven't actually met him face to face yet, but I'm really looking forward to doing that. So you grew up in Salford, is that right?
That's right.
And then you moved, and then you studied in Aberystwyth,
and then I went to Atlanta, Georgia, for a little while to train in Shakespearean acting.
Oh, and Shakespeare.
Yeah, but then I came back to England understandably, directors were like, "Why did you go to Atlanta, Georgia, to study Shakespeare?" And you're just like,
I'm
"I don't
not
have a good
really
answer."
sure.
Yeah, well, that was my exact answer. It's
That's amazing. Was it a classical course?
Yeah, it was like a rep company where we would perform 3 Shakespeare plays each term, and then just keep swapping roles and go for it. Yeah, it was
Wow.
really cool. I loved it.
That must have been fascinating.
It was definitely interesting, and I've always been I'm highly instinctive, and I always kind of follow what do I think needs to happen right now. And it's interesting because most people in politics are like deep strategists that are often thinking 10, 20 years into the future. And I have really smart people around me who I have those conversations with. But actually, I think it's also really important to live in the present moment and go, what do I need to do right now? And sometimes, most of the time, that works out really well. Other times, you go to Atlanta, Georgia to study Shakespeare, and you're like, I'm not sure how I turn this corner. I guess it's when I first became political, so I suppose it was really, really good for that. I'd lived in kind of a fairly kind of sheltered bubble where I hadn't seen deep injustice, and then you go to America and the mass inequality was so clear, particularly around poverty, but also racial discrimination. And also for the first time too, it was the first time I experienced homophobia. And so your bubble very quickly shatters, and then you start to notice injustices everywhere else.
Was that directed at you? Sorry, the homophobia. You felt that?
Yeah, or me and particularly the community around us. And you face that point where you go, I'm either going to stand against this injustice for myself, or I'm going to fold against the bullies or the tyrants, or whatever you want to call them. And I think once you've done that once for yourself, it's only one step away with empathy to go, if I can do it for myself, I can do it for these other communities. And actually these other communities need it right now, because I was in a place where it bothered me in terms of I was like, oh, I've not had that before. But I had enough resilience and enough, I guess, community and solidarity around me that I was totally fine. It was nasty, but it was fine. But lots of those communities didn't have that. And so I think living in America was an amazing experience of solidarity building. It was the time where George Bush had just won a second election as well.
Right. Okay.
And so there was kind of deep fear in the country about what was going on. And then coming back to the UK, just then being very clear that the injustice was all around me. It's just, it was coded differently than it was in America. I think the last few years of social media, I'm talking like last 10, 20 years, have meant that we're much more similar to America now. And I think it's less coded. It's just often the same injustices you see quite often because we're all sharing a language. But back then, I think it was more insidious in this country, particularly around racism.
Wow. So you came back to the UK, and how long before you joined? Because you joined the Lib Dems originally. How long before you joined them?
That took a few years. I still, at this point, was not party political in the slightest. In fact,
right. Okay.
I would say if you asked me who the leader of the opposition was back then, I probably wouldn't have told you. And it took me a while to get okay with telling that story, because there's kind of a deep shame about, oh, gosh, I had the skills to talk about politics. I was debating with people. I had opinions, but I was, I guess, privileged enough that party politics didn't matter to me. And so I thought that's something for someone else. I'm not interested, and just kind of let it tick by. And then I got very involved with community theatre, so Theatre of the Oppressed, Augusta Boal. And this is, I was doing both that and then kind of what's become much more popular these days, which is like immersive interactive theatre or game theatre. And what became really interesting was when I started to combine the game theatre with political theatre. So for me, this was, I could talk about this for hours, but
this is great.
Very brief summary of it is, so you've got a theatre company like Punch Drunk, who's an amazing theatre company where the audience wear masks and the action happens around them. But the bit that really bothered me, I wouldn't have been able to articulate it back then, is the audience have no agency. So no matter what happens, no matter what an audience member does, they're watching this play, this pre-written play reach out. It's got a beginning, middle, and end, and it loops around, and it just keeps happening. And I remember hearing a story about an audience member who got really into it once and tried to tackle an actor because they knew they were about to kill another character, but they were so in the moment, they were like, surely we've got to get involved. And obviously they were removed from the space, and I don't
That's a success, I think, for the performer.
So you're so into it. The empathy is so strong. But it really got me thinking about, we need to give audience members agency, because otherwise what we're doing is we're reinforcing the idea that you can't make a difference or you can't make change or your actions don't matter. So I started creating theatre with lots of different theatre companies. And one of the last shows that I made before I was elected as a politician was called Echo Chambers or Echo Chambers. And what I loved about this show is it started with an audience of about 50, where me and a few others were kind of leaders of a green movement or Extinction Rebellion type things. But we were very top down. We were instructing people what to do. As an audience, you've got 5 minutes to do this. And then I'd start to make rules, but within the rules would be subtle kind of injustices where I was favouring certain people in the group who were my favourite audience members, or just making rules that the group hadn't agreed to. And I would keep pushing the audience up until the point the audience would have to rebel and there would have to be a revolution against me as the leader. There was then various mechanisms in the show where I would be removed from the room. And by the very end of the show, for the last 10 minutes, the audience were left alone with no actors whatsoever. And they had kind of had to create the end of the show based on the problems that were going outside. There was a mob that was descending on them, and they had to go give a speech to this mob to explain the actions of what, the decisions they were made and what they were doing. And I think, if I'm really honest, more than anything else I've done in my life, that was the springboard into politics, where you were like, we've got to give people agency.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
I just got goosebumps listening to that. That sounds fantastic. That's what theatre should do. Theatre should challenge you. It should make you think. It should, it should stretch the sort of boundaries of your own conscious and make you aware of other things. I love that.
I remember seeing a friend after the first performance of it, who now is also in politics, seeing him afterwards, and he was buzzing and wired, but actually he said, that was the most stressful experience I've ever been into. I'm not entirely sure audiences are going to love that. You might want to like tone it down a little bit.
Was there a script?
No. So there was kind of beats of the show places you knew you had to go to. It had a time limit, so you knew it had to end by that point. But yeah, how the audiences reacted would completely make a difference. One other quick story, which is much funnier on the same thing. I also did a show like this 2 years earlier before this. I get confused around dates, but I'd say around 2017 at the Tower of London. Mm-hmm. So it's an immersive theatre show where I would meet a group of audience members outside Tower Hill Tube Station, and we would plot to invade the Tower of London in the same way that the Peasants' Revolt did. And we would take control of the tower. Based on our political kind of ideology. And so, again, not a scripted show. It would very much depend on what the audience would do. But my favourite story ever from being an actor was plotting outside the Tower of London. Obviously, the Tower of London were in this. It was their show. Plotting how we were going to invade when police officers came over to stop me because they'd heard about a plot to break into the Tower of London. And I didn't want to break the kind of experience for the audience. So I was having to negotiate with police officers, show them my literal Tower of London ID to explain that I was working for them, and then turn to the audience and go, it's all right, they're in on it too. And then just carry on. And just seeing audience members completely baffled what it is. But again, these are all patterns about, I love traditional theatre, I love Shakespeare, but I do worry sometimes that when the establishment are the ones that are telling the stories or choosing who tells the stories or not allowing working class actors to become actors because there's no funding anymore. The stories we tell are stories like Succession. I love Succession. This isn't me against Succession, but where are those working class stories? Where are those marginalized group stories? And so I think we need to both fund those stories properly, but also look at ways of giving audience members agency in experiences or in theatre to keep reinforcing that we can write our own scripts.
I couldn't agree more, mate. I really couldn't. It's so refreshing to hear a politician talk so passionately about theatre, because I have never heard that before. Like, where are the politicians who are interested in the arts? I remember Tony Blair being pictured with a guitar and hanging around with Noel Gallagher. And like, that's the extent of, to my knowledge, politicians that are interested in arts and theatre.
It's really obvious to me that I'm someone, don't get me wrong, I'd love to give a good speech. A Labour politician a few weeks ago in the chamber said that the only dramatics that should happen in this chamber are my speeches. And she was trying to insult me, but I actually, I appreciated it. I think the art of oratory and oratory
Yes.
is kind of lost in politics. Like, you look at Parliament and you're just like, a lot of these people just can't speak. Now, I'm not saying that should be the only skill. There's lots of other skills that should be valued and should be put to the forefront. But I do think a basic ability to communicate without having to kind of hold a piece of paper and read out lines that someone else has written for you just feels like, to have an opinion and to express yourself is important. But the wider point is this, is that I'm aware that even when I give the best speech I can possibly give, I might motivate people who already agree with me. A really good speech will change the minds of some people who are wavering and on the edge, but it is very, very difficult to move people quickly. The arts can do that in minutes. Like, tell a good story, grab someone by the heart, and you're going to move that dial. And so, politics is incredibly important. I'm not here to say it's not. It's clearly become my life now. But actually, I think there is little more important for dealing with things like poverty, inequality, mental health crisis, the climate crisis, than a good story well told.
Well, look at Adolescence that's just been on TV. Have you seen it yet?
No, I've not seen it. I don't. As a politician, that's like career madness to say that you've not seen it when everyone's talking about it. But I've not got around to it yet.
All right, I think you've got 3 weeks until I release this.
Right.
So you've got 3 weeks to watch it. So
I'll make a commitment to watch it.
I'll cut that bit out, and we'll just pretend from now on that you've seen it. Honestly, mate, I've just got goosebumps thinking about it. It is so important, so vital, so current, so relevant. The performances are just electric, and it was all every episode's done in one shot.
I know, I didn't know that. Wow,
it's one take. So
it's basically theatre.
It's theatre. Yeah. So
sense.
they had 2 weeks rehearsal per episode, and then they recorded a version in the morning and a version in the afternoon for a whole week of that one episode. So because it's huge. There's scenes where there's scenes that start in like a living room, and the camera comes out onto the driveway. Then they get into the car, and the camera still carries with them all the way to a police station. Then they're in an interview room. It's something that hasn't been done before.
It sounds amazing. I saw someone on social media the other day say the unsung heroes of this are the camera people, but I didn't know the thing about it being in one take. So they said, look how they've managed to track this shot. And there was a 30-second shot, and I was like, that's not that impressive. Like, you have a track, but that makes sense if it's in one take.
As someone who works in TV, I was so conscious of like reflections. I was looking in bits of glass and waiting to see a boom guy and all that stuff. Yeah, amazing. But that, for me, Britain should be the absolute pinnacle of arts. Absolutely. It should be the crown in our jewel. I've got a statistic here. The UK's creative industries contributed £124.6 billion in 2022 and employed 2.4 million people.
It's phenomenal. And I would say, I often use the economic arguments too, but it's our humanity as well, right?
Humanity.
Sure, it makes people money, it makes jobs, that is really important, but it's also our humanity.
Absolutely. It should be the crown jewel of this country. So why as a performer do I not feel valued? I don't feel valued as a performer. Right. I don't feel like there's voices out there for me, certainly not in the current government or in the Conservatives. It breaks my heart. And just to go back to a point that you mentioned before, about the lack of funding in schools for our young people, drama falling off syllabuses.
Absolutely.
It was a wider conversation there about funding across education. But I've done bits of teaching. I've taught young people and young people studying acting and drama and dance and movement and all of that. It's great for their social skills, their sense of playfulness, their team building. There's so many things, confidence. There's so many things that they're missing out on if drama isn't really pushed out there.
Yeah, I remember being 14, getting bullied at school, knew I was gay, but wasn't yet expressing it. And I went off to Manchester Youth Theatre, which was like a 3-week residential in Manchester.
Lovely.
Where we were just creating theatre and youth. First time I'd ever kind of been around my people. And I just remember coming home and my dad just kind of double taking at me and saying to my stepmom, there's something different, isn't there? And like me not being able to articulate it, but fully understanding in that moment what had happened. Like I finally felt like a human being that had worth and value. And that came through drama. This is
exactly it. This is exactly what.
No,
honestly, no. It's made such a profound difference on me, and as I say, I've taught. I've seen it firsthand. I used to teach at it's got charity status, a place called Rare School in Liverpool, and they have people from all different walks of life. We have some students there who are from, serious poverty. Some places in North Liverpool, children who don't have curtains in their bedroom and sleep on a mattress on the floor and, can't afford to get the bus, so we have to pick them up. And, real sadness. You put a TV camera on them and give them a script and tell them that they're good at something. All of a sudden, they come alive.
Absolutely.
And that is what we need to be investing in. It's crucial. I remember, sorry, I was so conscious having you on. I was like, right, I don't want to make all of this political. I want to talk in a much more broader sense, but I can't not.
Everything is political.
I can't not. I can't
Right.
talk about these things without talking about the last 14 years and what's happened to the state of this country. And it's these things on the ground, and it's those children. They're the future. They're the people we should be raising up the most.
100%.
It breaks my heart. It really, really does.
I think I've met young people from Rare because a good
Have
friend
you?
of mine, Ricky Beadle Blair,
Yeah.
hosts Vogue Balls at Liverpool.
I've been a judge.
Rare have oh, amazing. That's so funny. And so I've been to a few of them. And I think Rare have sent dancers before.
Yep.
And so, the story was familiar to me. God, the energy in those Vogue Balls is just incredible. Talk about community and talk about people being themselves.
It's wild.
Yeah.
They asked me would I judge it. I've done it. I think I've done it 2 or 3 times now. And I said, oh yeah, of course I will. I'll do that. I turned up and I realised I had no idea what Vogue was. I didn't know what I was supposed to be judging it on. I was like, what am I looking for? And I remember speaking to Ricky and being like what am I? And he was like, so it's the flicks, it's how solid everything is, how, I was like, I'm just going to give everyone a 10.
Right.
I'm just going to make it, everyone's a winner.
Ricky's one of my best friends, and I know he'd totally be there for giving everyone a 10. Like, that's totally Ricky's vibe.
Yeah. Can we have a little chat about climate change?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Just to lighten the mood.
I thought we'd like not to terrify my audience too much. How screwed are we right now if we carry on this path that we're on?
So the if is really important. If we carry on the path we're in, and I'll come back to the if at the end to not paralyze people into complete fear. We're really screwed, and I think it's probably worse than even I understand and know. And I'm absorbed in this stuff every day. I'm talking to scientists regularly. The path we were already on when we were meeting the Paris Climate Agreement was already a path that was going to limit the worst effects of climate change. So the floods and wildfires we're seeing around the world, they are going to become more common. That is now baked in, and actually, to a point, no matter what we do, there will still be climate disasters around the world, including this country. My worry, though, is if there's lots we can do to not make them absolutely devastating. Now, sometimes I hear people casually talking about this in kind of a almost like they're over it kind of way, where they say things are already baked in and things are so bad that actually it doesn't matter what we do. That is totally not true. Every small degree of warming we can reduce, so 1.5 is what we were looking to get, and we're heading more for 2 or even 2.5. But each degree within that is literally billions of people's lives around the world. So we're talking about the Horn of Africa becoming uninhabitable. We're talking about Bangladesh being underwater. We're talking particularly in places in the global south facing the worst impacts, but also right here in the UK too. We've already seen the beginnings of this. But every degree we can keep it down, we are reducing the devastating impacts it will have on people's lives. So even if we miss the really important targets that we look like we're missing, it is still absolutely worth doing everything we can, and I really mean everything, to reduce the amount of devastating impact that there's going to be. I suppose the reason why it's important is that we have known about, the broader establishment have known about climate change for literally decades. There's lots of research now that shows that BP and Shell and the oil companies knew about it in the 1960s and 1970s and were paying for research into how to stop climate change because they were worried that they knew they were causing it. And then when they realized it was going to affect their business model, they instead hired PR, and they came up with this idea of carbon footprint. And we often hear people say, how can I reduce my own personal carbon footprint? It's a complete distraction because it encourages people to turn on each other to reduce their to do more recycling or to drive less or to fly less, all things we can talk about that, can matter in and of themselves, but a complete distraction from the vast amount of oil and gas that's being pumped by those huge polluting companies is so incomparable that it would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. There is lots we can do. So that's the if bit that I put there, because I don't think we need to carry on this trajectory. And it's not the 1960s and 70s anymore, where the oil and gas companies know about it and the rest of us don't. It's not even the noughties of the 2010s, where a small group of people know about this and they're organizing and campaigning, but the wider public don't know about it. We're now at the place where regularly the public say that they care about climate change, that this matters to them, that they're worried about it. Admittedly, the bit that we still need to fill in is when you present the solutions to it, the public don't always like the solutions. So there's a whole piece of work to do around co-designing the solutions to bring people on board, which brings us to the beginning of the conversation. The reason why I like meeting communities and the reason why I like chatting to people is because that's the only way we're going to co-design. We're at the moment in a real situation where very often it's painted as us, people who care about the climate, and them, people who don't care about it. We need to get rid of this us and them. We need to all be us. And the only way we're all going to be us is by conversations, by uncomfortability, creative tension, by working out that sometimes we will disagree on things, or we will even disagree on the ways to get to a destination. But we won't get over those disagreements if we pretend everything is fine and we've got all the answers. We'll only get over it by being in communities, presenting the data, presenting stories. We're back to the art, and creating new stories with data that say, okay, this is the route forward, and getting, I was going to say everyone, pretty much everyone, the vast majority of the country on board with that. And I think that's how we're going to tackle the climate crisis.
Yeah, it feels, to go back to pick up on something that you said then, about us sort of turning on each other and going, well, you need to recycle more and you need to drive less and stop taking flights. That certainly feels for me, that's certainly how it feels for me, is that it doesn't matter what I do. It's a drop in the ocean. What can we be doing then? We're having these conversations. We're getting out. We're speaking. We're making our voices heard. But beyond that, is there anything that we should be doing as a community, as a society?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what I do thing is an interesting conversation, because in some ways it doesn't matter, which is a really odd thing for me to be saying. Let me caveat though with, I don't drive, I cycle everywhere. I live somewhere with good public transport links. I'm vegan. I don't fly. I do like all the green things that you can in a tick list. But if I'm honest, I do these things partly because I know that if I go into a hostile media interview and I get asked these things, I can say it doesn't matter what I do, it matters what the establishment does and the systems change does. They're going to call me a hypocrite, and I'm going to spend the rest of the interview explaining why I'm not a hypocrite. So I guess I decided at some point just to make the personal sacrifice to go, I'm not going to do these things for the wider good. But there is a huge privilege and entitlement in that, wider sacrifice, which is, I can afford to live in central London. I can afford to ride my bike. Riding my bike is cheaper. But that is also a point too that, I'm saying there's an entitlement and a privilege to it. A lot of these things are actually cheaper. The not eating meat thing is interesting because people often think of veganism as like a very expensive thing, which if you go into a restaurant, because they have a small catchment, it is very expensive. But actually, if we're talking about locally grown food, vegetables, not eating meat, it's much, much cheaper. What is lacking is the access to poorer communities to be able to grow their own food and things like that. So it's a very nuanced conversation. But what can people do? I think ultimately they can either lobby their politicians to say, we care about these things, because very often I think politicians are looking at the public and going, if this was really important to them, they'd be making me do something. And the public are looking at politicians and going, if this was really important, they'd be doing something about it. And everyone's just in this standoff.
Yeah.
So I think where politicians aren't showing leadership for public to organise in their communities to say, actually, this matters to us and we want to talk about it, is incredibly impactful. There's an amazing group, for instance, just one example, called Mums for Lungs. I know they exist in Liverpool too. They're a group in Manchester and London and lots of cities. Does what it says on the tin. It's mums who have children who are worried about their children's health, stunted lungs, diabetes caused by air pollution, mental health issues caused by air pollution. I should say it's not just mums, although that's their names, it's dads too. But actually that has been so impactful on politicians, because when you have a politician in the room and they are surrounded by a group of worried parents with their kids saying, you're poisoning our kids with toxic air, do something about it.
Don't mess with mums.
Right, don't mess with mums, quite. There's only so long they can resist that for. Now that's air pollution, that's just one example. But I think when you can think of any example, people organising and saying this matters to us, and again, we're back to storytelling. If you can tell a good story with it, politicians will hear that. And one thing that really surprised me when I was elected was I'm bombarded with lobbying emails or concerned emails all the time from people about things that they care about. And I try as much as I can to read every single one of them. I can't make the pledge I do read entirely in every single one of them. Sometimes, you read the first few sentences and there's a long rant about something you're already familiar that the person's annoyed about, and you just wouldn't have the time to do it. But when I do have time, I really do, especially if it's a new email and it's a subject I don't know about. These things impact me. Like, I wouldn't be a human being if they didn't impact me. And so even when it's a group of emails with something I disagree with, when you're reading them, you've at least got me thinking about something differently, even if I'm not going to necessarily just agree with something, because lots of people think it. Lobbying works, and I think people often think writing to their MP is kind of a useless task, especially because they get these emails back frequently that are like very standardized emails that probably a member of staff has written for them. I've had that too, so I appreciate that's demoralizing, and I've had that thought where I'm like, it didn't even get to the MP. That is, an intern possibly who has read it, been given the standard reply, and I've shifted nothing. But actually, even that member of staff or intern is still in an office with that MP, and will still be talking about the huge overload of emails they're getting. And so writing a letter is not the only thing to do, and often that gets disparaged as, I'm going to write a strongly worded letter, but don't dismiss it. I think writing letters is important, but I think more important than anything is organising in communities. So whether that's with trade unions, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's with a faith group or a non-faith group, whether that's your local drama club, coming together and saying, these are the things we collectively care about, and we're going to find a way to lift our voices, but particularly the voices of either the voiceless, of the people who have been made voiceless because the system oppresses them, then I can think of little more important than what people could be doing with their day, actually, if they have the time and energy to go, how can I support people who, in this point, can't support themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, mate. We are much stronger together.
Absolutely.
I think it seems to me. Just pick up on something you touched upon there. There is a social economic element to this as well in terms of priorities.
Definitely.
You know, if you're a parent and you're struggling to make ends meet, and you're having to choose, as we know some people have had to in recent years, between heating and eating, things like the environment take a back seat, and so there's a wider conversation there about we have to lift people out of poverty as well to make them socially conscious. We have to do that. Otherwise, for the majority of people, it's just not going to be on their wavelength.
Yeah, and it's all the same struggle. I met with Gary Stevenson recently, who I'm sure lots of people will know because he's gone astronomical. That's not the right word, astronomical. Whatever word is fired into space. Talking about inequality, and we had a really excellent discussion. But ultimately, what I was talking to him about, and I think he totally gets this, is that the same people who are the same forces that are creating the inequality, where the poor people are getting poorer than they've ever been before, while the rich are getting richer, are the corporations and the super rich, who are the same people who are polluting our environment, polluting our democracy, polluting our communities. And so I don't see these struggles as different. I think what's totally legitimate in the question is if you're, a parent who is worried about feeding your kids or heating the home, the climate crisis is probably the last thing on your mind. Plus, you've got a right-wing media telling you it's going to cost you more. We know that's not true. In fact, it's the opposite. We have some of the leakiest homes in Europe, and what I mean by that is they're not insulated, and that's even in poorer communities. So they are being punished twice. They're being punished once for having a substandard home that isn't particularly warm, and two, you're having to raise your heating bills up to compensate for the fact that it wasn't insulated in the first place. Now, if we insulated every home in Britain that needs it, and that should be a government policy, that would reduce people's bills, vital in the cost of living crisis. It's obviously important for the climate crisis. And also we could be creating good public sector jobs that could be getting paid properly too, with proper working conditions where people are treated with dignity. So all of the solutions are one of the same thing. And so when net zero or climate change is put in opposition to inequality, we have to be really clear that's a very specific agenda that has come from people with power and wealth who do not want us talking about the climate crisis, who do not want us talking about poverty, but actually want us fighting amongst ourselves. And I think what's really important is I was at an iftar last night. I was just talking to you about this. And one of the things that was being discussed was we keep hearing this phrase, white working class. And someone said to me, it really stuck with me. You never hear about Pakistani working class or Bengali working class. These communities often, obviously exist. And I think the reason why we're not hearing about them is because the issue of racism and the issue of class have always been intertwined. And in fact, it was the black community who were standing side by side with the white working class in our communities for decades. And I think the powers that be in the establishment have realized that's a real threat to their power and their monopoly on power if people start to organize together. So it is classic divide and rule politics of let's separate people into demographics and turn them in on each other. Instead of going, the very clear struggle right now is between the people, the 99%, and the elite, the 1%. And that transcends race, it transcends class. Not that those things aren't important in themselves in other conversations. But when we're talking about inequality, it is very clear that there are 99% of people who are being screwed over and 1% of people who happen to control the media and the stories that are being told who are doing very well. And what we need to do is tip that balance.
Yeah, we really, really do. Especially the media. I think the media side of it's really interesting. I see it all the time. I've got family members who, subscribe to the Daily Mail, and the damage that newspaper has caused, I'll use the Daily Mail as an example, the damage that newspaper has caused in poisoning people it can't be, you can't take it lightly. It's made a huge, huge impact, and it terrifies me. It really, really worries me that these superpowers, these billionaires and oligarchs have control of our media. That can't be just. That can't be fair.
Right. And we really need to care about people like your family, who I'm presuming you care about, and all the people who are reading these stories and hearing these things and going, I'm so sick of Tories and I'm so sick of Labour. I'm not saying this about your family, but are looking at reform and going, oh, okay, there's something interesting.
I get it.
I don't agree with everything. It totally makes sense. And I think, whilst on the national media, I will always come for Nigel Farage and his crony mates. And I think that's the right thing to do. Someone who is thinking about voting for reform is a completely different person to someone who is funding or in the Reform Party, at a senior level, because they are manipulating those people. And I think without talking down to those people or assuming we know better And we saw that during the Brexit referendum where David Cameron said, don't worry, if you vote Remain, everything is going to stay the same. And huge amounts of people went, I don't want things to stay the same. My life's shit.
This is rubbish.
Right, exactly. And so I think, we need compassion and empathy and to listen and to engage with people who are looking towards the right for answers to say, although they're identifying the problems correctly, because I imagine Farage would probably agree with my people versus the elite framing. It's just he paints himself as one of the people and anti-establishment when he literally is the very definition of the establishment. In fact, 95% of Reform's donations since the general election have come from climate-denying companies, high-polluting companies. That's £2.3 million they've taken since last July to fund this project, because they have a very obvious project for stopping change and obstructing change. And I think we need to expose that. But if you do it in a way where you're talking down to people, then they hear those numbers and they go, well, you would say that, but I'm not seeing the evidence of that. And I think this is where politics isn't going to work, I don't think. I think art and conversation, which should be politics but often isn't, is the only thing we can do to go knock on the doors, to go speak to those people, to meet them in their communities. And that's exactly why I'm touring the country at the moment. Is I just spent the weekend in Kent. I went to about 12 different stops, including Thanet, where Nigel Farage famously ran and they saw him off. And it was really moving, to be honest. Both the people who came up to turn up to my rallies, who were obviously very supportive of what I was doing and we were doing and get it. And we're like, just, I would say, desperate to go, what we're doing is right, but we need to do it so much bigger and we need to charge this quicker because Reform are on the rise and on the move. We need to counter this. And I agree entirely. But also just as moving were the doors I knocked on where people said, Green Party, I'm not sure about that. I'm voting for Reform. And then me just asking some open questions like why? And frequently it did come down to migration. And then you very quickly go, what is it about migration that you're worried about? Now, don't get me wrong. There were a couple of answers where it was just straight up racism and I wasn't going to win them over. And there's a disagreement of worldview. I'm not abandoning those people permanently, but for the short term, I think we've got other places where we can work with people in an easier way and then try and talk to people who have fallen into a racist hole. But for a lot of people, it was that they were worried about houses or that their family were on a social housing waiting list or they can't get an NHS appointment or the school is literally crumbling down. Or a couple of times people just pointed at their street and said, look at where I live. And you can see the fly tipping, you can see the holes in the street. And you go, I get it. And so you'll very quickly then have a conversation about how those issues aren't the issues of migrants. Those are the issues of decades of austerity from Thatcher right through to, well, now to this new
still going
government.
on, just been announced.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were quite a lot of people that I was surprised how many who were really open to that message and very quickly went, just the fact you've knocked on my door means I'll probably vote for you. Whether they will or not, I don't know. I won't be in the ballot box. But that was really clear. But what was a much more common response was, thanks for knocking on my door. It's been good to chat, and they were pleased how much time I gave them, and they were going to go away and think about it. And I think some of those things are just seeds. The next time they see Reform speak on the TV or Farage, they're just listening with a different ear and noticing what's happening. Is that enough? Absolutely not. We need to grow the Green Party. We need to grow the left more broadly to be able to counter these measures. But I think all of these things need to happen at the same time. It's not like you tick one box and then you go, okay, next stage of the strategy. I think you need to build political power. You need to work in communities. And you need art, and all of these things have to happen at the same time.
Yeah, and you don't want to compromise. That's the thing. It's really difficult because when you're competing against a party like Reform, which, as you say, has huge backing, vast wealth, the benefit of a lot of the press as well, and actually, I think they've done really well. Certainly, Farage has done really well on TikTok and social media, and I know a lot of young people that are absolutely in the Reform camp now, and I just think it's. I just think it's crazy, but I suppose you have to sort of, from a Green Party perspective, you want to, as you say, you want to compete and you want to win and you want to get your message across, but you don't want to compromise. It's a really fine balance, it seems to me.
It's really fine, and something I've been thinking about a lot because I've been doing media interviews recently, is when those people who are thinking about voting Reform turn on the TV and see me slating Reform or criticising Reform, how does that not feel like a personal attack on them? And so it is a tightrope to walk because you just cannot allow Reform to take the stage and not challenge them. I also think I'm hearing this loud and clear that people want to see their politicians with more feist and with more energy and on the front foot. And to be honest, that's my natural personality. I think it probably comes from acting and improvisation that I want to react to things instantly. And almost everything when you become a politician, you're not instructed. It's not as direct as that, but the implicit implication is that you need to hold back a little bit, or you need to be tight-lipped, or you need to not say exactly what you're thinking. And I'd absolutely reject that. I think this is a moment for us all to see really clearly, speak for truth, and keep listening to people. And so what I've been working on, and it's difficult, is how do you criticize Farage and reform, and in the same breath then talk to the people who might have been voting for him and explain why he is not the solution, but actually the Green Party and your local Green candidate is. And that's a lot of words to get in 1 minute. So it helps that I talk fast, but it's something that, I'm always thinking about who is receiving our messages, and beyond the people who are already agreeing. And I'm really appreciative that people are already agreeing. I'm massively appreciative of their members. But how do you reach out to the people who would hear that and go, that doesn't sound instinctively true to me?
I guess it's almost like proving them wrong, isn't it? Rather than pouring scorn on them and saying they're a gang of, their manifesto doesn't hold any water. What they're offering is actually bullshit. This is what we're offering. You take their policies and go, well, you can have a look at them, but actually look at what we're offering, and you can see the difference immediately. Because I've read the Green Party, the latest manifesto is great.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
It's really, really good. What's the tagline?
Real hope and real change, which I really love, because Labour came out with Vote for Change or something like that, and I think it was the same kind of week we were talking about what a slogan was going to be, and we were like, oh, they've nabbed change, but it's a false change. It clearly is not the change we need. And
real change.
Real hope, real change.
Yeah, it really did make an impact. That I think it will stand you guys in good stead. Just going back to the sort of the voting in this country and how it's all set up. The Greens have always been, or I don't know, you personally, in favour of proportional representation. Is that still the case?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that a few years ago, and I didn't really answer your question about the Lib Dems. I skillfully dodged it.
It's okay.
Although I wasn't intentionally doing it.
If the Lib Dems, if I'm being brutally honest, the Lib Dems bore me.
Right.
Let's move on.
Yeah, no, for sure. But the answer to it in 20 seconds is the Lib Dems were the party that were famously talking about proportional representation, and the Green Party weren't. Now, Natalie Bennett was leader at the time, and I've spoken to her about this since, and her response is completely fair enough. We don't get enough media time now, but back then we got even less. So we might get a minute for a month. And so in that minute, you're going to talk about things that really matter to people, like poverty and inequality, or are you going to talk about proportional representation, a thing back then that very few people had heard of? And so it made complete sense that the Green Party were like, actually, our focus is going to be on day-to-day issues that really matter to people. Now, I think, and I'm sure, well, I know Natalie would absolutely agree, proportional representation is a day-to-day issue that affects people, because ultimately the first past the post system is resulting in unrepresentative democracy, and it's resulting in politicians who don't have to worry about votes because they know they can't get kicked out because they've got a safe seat, or they used to think they had a safe seat. That is changing. And so they can then take donations from oil and gas companies, gambling companies, financial services, whoever it might be, and be more worried about their donors than they are about voters. And that's completely the wrong way around. We need people to be worried about voters. This all being said, a year or two ago, we really kind of started to rocket at local elections. We quadrupled the amount of councillors we won. And it was very clear to me that we worked out how to win even under first past the post. And so I started to be worried that every time someone hears me talk about proportional representation, what they're really hearing is that the Green Party can't win, which is like an old kind of urban myth that's been around, that's been holding us back. People have said to me for years, I love the Green Party, I love all your policies, but I need to vote Labour because they're the ones who can stop the Tories.
Really? People have said that?
Oh, it's probably one of the most common things I ever hear. And I think we're about to hear it again in a few years' time. The Labour Party will without a doubt go, oh, we know you all like the Green Party, but you've got to stop Nigel Farage being Prime Minister, so you need to vote Labour to stop the Greens. So this is something Sadiq Khan did to me in London recently, where myself and my colleague Zoe Garbett, who ran for mayor, we kept presenting green ideas, and he kept going, oh, I love all the ideas, but they can't win, so vote Labour to stop the Tories. And then within a week, when I got voted in, I challenged him on something and said, these ideas are really popular. He said, if they were that popular, the Greens would have done better, haven't they? But Labour got all of these votes. So he both asked Green people to lend their vote to him to stop the Conservatives, and then actively doesn't work with the Greens to say, oh, no, I'm not taking your ideas because Labour got all of these votes. It's entirely disingenuous, and it's happening at every level of government. So the answer is to work out how to win under first past the post, despite it being an unfair system, which means we target resources. We went for 4 seats at the last general election, and we got 4 seats. What I find much more moving, though, is out of those 4 seats, even though we weren't really campaigning because we were focusing on those 4 seats, and even though the media are often saying Greens can only win in those 4 seats, a Green vote is a wasted vote, we still got nearly 2 million votes.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Absolutely. Now, I'm ambitious. I want another 2 million. I want even more than that. I want as many votes as it takes to get to be the government. But I think it is worth a breath sometimes to go, that's how much people are crying out for change, and that's how much people are rejecting hateful and divisive politics. They're still voting for the Green Party. And I think the very obvious thing to say to all of that is if the Labour Party are really worried about reform, then why have they just cut disability benefits? Why are they not calling a genocide? Why are they taking... The freebie stuff is all, small fish, I think, compared to the much more scandalous things that are going on. But it is still a culture that speaks of us and them, that speaks of politicians that don't really care about the public. And all of that is so massively feeding into reform's hands. So people say, you need to vote for the government to stop fascism. They're already on the trajectory of fascism. We've already had Keir Starmer shouting at Kemi Badenoch that under the Tories, we had an open border experiment, was his exact phrase. The Tories were incredibly illiberal about immigration. We had the hostile environment. We had toxic racism. We literally had racist riots on our streets. So for Keir Starmer as a Labour Prime Minister to attack the Tories from the right is beyond contempt, and I think should give everyone cause that if ever you're thinking of voting for a party because you think you need to stop another party, be very careful about what you're voting for.
Is there any political appetite for proportional representation? Is there enough? Because there's certainly this. I speak to people and they say, yeah, absolutely. I feel frustrated. I feel let down. This system is completely unfair. It doesn't matter who I vote for. It's between the two parties. Is there any political appetite?
Yeah, I think there's a massive appetite among the public. The problem is, again, the politicians who have, won under a first past the post system. So we're back to Turkey's voting for Christmas. The Labour Party are very interesting in this. So they had a party conference a couple of years ago where they were going to vote on proportional representation, and it was blocked. So it never happened.
Huh.
A year later, it comes to the conference floor, and proportional representation campaigners have done a lot of work with the trade unions and made it really clear that under proportional representation, they would have more power because there would be more choice. And so I'm not there for trade unions to have more power. I'm there for workers to have more power, which is what the point of the trade unions are. So that all kind of aligns brilliantly and exactly where we need to be. The Labour Party conference voted for proportional representation. That became the Labour Party policy. In the Green Party, if something is our policy, it's our policy. That is then official. In the Labour Party, Keir Starmer looked at the conference and just went, no, we're not doing that. And then it was just dropped. I really, at that point, I can't understand the point of being a Labour Party member. Like, if you can go to a conference, have your picture taken, show how many of you are there, have a vote on something and a debate on something, and then it's just completely ignored. And the opposite is done. In fact, Keir Starmer says, you don't see any need to change first past the post, despite campaigning on a ticket of saying first past the post was broken. And we know that Keir Starmer ran on the coattails of Jeremy Corbyn with a whole load of policies and pledges that he then just immediately dashed. I just don't know why anyone would be a Labour Party member as opposed to the Green Party, where our party members are literally the heart and lifeblood of the party in terms of they're the ones doing the community meetings, they're the ones who are working on the political strategy, and they're the ones who are creating the policy. And it comes back to agency again. I think we really need a more democratic system, both in our political parties and in wider politics, including, by the way, and this is, I think, a really important point, I really think we should be paying people to be involved in politics. And what I mean by that is when governments or councils are doing consultations, far too often the people who can afford to turn up are the people who have nice jobs or they're retired. And it's not to knock those people, their views deserve to be heard too, but it is massively disproportionately weighted in them. Whereas someone who has to go to the food bank that day is very unlikely to then be able to pop down to a town hall or a government consultation to give their opinion. Whereas if we were recompensating people for their time, effort and labour, that would be rebalancing who has a seat at the table.
That's such a good idea.
Right.
Why have I never heard that before?
I put it to the mayor recently and he said to me, such an outrageous answer, that I shouldn't knock volunteerism. And all over London, there's boxing coaches and scout coaches and choir leaders who are working for free, who are doing this amazing work, and I should acknowledge and support that. Those people are amazing. I have so many friends who are doing volunteer-led projects. I in the past have done many volunteer-led projects, but that is not a replicable strategy. No. And the people who are running those volunteer-led projects are people who can afford to do so. And so the people in the communities who see those leaders are often attracted by people who look and sound like them. If we really want to reach the communities that most need it, it's not about knocking volunteerism, but it's about making sure we provide the mechanism and the support to give the space for people to be able to do that.
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting you mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. I campaigned for Jeremy on the back of the manifesto.
Right.
It was the first time that in a long time that I felt like someone offered something worthwhile. And look, we can sit here and debate the merits and flaws of Jeremy Corbyn, as there are many, and it's still quite a divisive issue. But I don't think it can be underestimated. Again, I'm going back to young people. I don't think it'd be underestimated the impact that Jeremy Corbyn losing that election had on young people, because I think for the first time people felt like this is our guy. This is someone who actually represents us. I was at Glastonbury. I go every year and I listen to him speak, and he had 100,000 young people cheering him on. And then when it got to the election and what happened, I think people felt really undervalued and felt really disillusioned with politics. And I think that's carried on. So I think what you're saying there about maybe giving people a voice back is just so important. We've just got to reach out to these young people and say there is an alternative. It didn't have to die with Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm reading an amazing book at the moment called "This Is Only the Beginning" by Michael Chesham. He
Okay.
was very involved with the Corbyn project. And I've not reached the end of the book, so apologies to Michael if this ever reaches him and he goes, "You completely mischaracterized what I was saying." But from what I understand, he's saying there's a certain generation of young people, which I think were roughly probably in this age, that really became politicized over the Lib Dem betrayal over tuition fees.
Yeah.
And so we're in Trafalgar Square or wherever you were in the country, opposing that and speaking out against that. And were completely ignored. This is, by the way, I say tuition fees. I guess it really started with the Iraq War too. So many of us marched. There were 1 million people that day. I remember that experience of going, well, if so many of us have spoken out against this, like the government have to listen. They just shrugged it off. And so that's kind of, I guess, the first warning sign that our democracy is broken. But then there's a bit of hope around the tuition fees, that there's so much kind of organising and people coming together and Occupy London and the Occupy movements around the world, that really feels like this moment where political change is about to happen. And then what happens is we see a rise in authoritarianism. The police start to storm people on horses. I don't think I'd really appreciated this till I read Michael's book, but he talks about how the police were just very lucky, or the public were very lucky, that no one died that day. I don't think I quite realised how brutal it was, but there were broken arms, broken hands. They were just storming at people with horses and batons.
Wow.
This was a real show of the establishment to say, if you organise, if you protest, we will push you down, we will hunt you down. And then, of course, this kind of wave of uncertainty in the country and kind of unhappiness culminated in the riots in the summer, which were related, but also, or very much related, but also often a different set of group of people. And that group of people were often minoritized groups who felt like they had the least to lose.
It was frustration.
Obviously had the most to lose and ended up in the criminal justice system. Absolutely frustration. And the fact that the government at the time gave them disproportionately long sentences to really prove a lesson. Anyway, in Michael's book, he talks about, and I agree, that completely shattered people's confidence, their ability to organise, and felt like they completely lost hope. And then Jeremy Corbyn came along, and suddenly there was this moment where we go, this is it. This is the moment where people can organise and come together. And, people often, this is me talking now, not Michael's book, but people often talk about, as if the Jeremy Corbyn project had failed or it was rejected. I think it's always important to say that he got 3 million more votes than Keir Starmer. Did he game the political system properly in the first past the post? Absolutely not. That was a total failure. And I think even people mostly involved with the project would probably say that more than me. But in terms of a politics of empathy, compassion, community, of a politics of recognising the people versus the elite, it's incredibly popular in this country, despite the absolute turmoil and daily outrage that the media had, pretty much all parts of the media, against Jeremy Corbyn. They were willing to do anything to stop him. And so I think we've had this generation that have gone through the Occupy movement, felt hopeful, that's been shattered. They went through Jeremy Corbyn, that was shattered. And again, they saw the establishment come to crush him. And so I'm thinking about these people a lot at the moment, because I'm meeting lots of people who say, I support the Green Party, or in terms of I support all your policies, I support what you're up to, but I'm not ready to join a political party yet. I've been through it and I'm destroyed, and I've lost kind of hope and energy. And those are people that I really want to talk to, because I think there's a real opportunity here where the Green Party has a platform already of all of these councillors were really clearly aligned with the politics that was happening back then, and the politics of hope and the politics of change, and tangible change too. So it's not just words. And I understand if people are tired and they're exhausted. But what I would say is, marginalised communities who are facing oppression are tired and exhausted. People who are tackling the climate crisis are tired and exhausted. So if people feel like they can't get involved right now, this is not a judgment call. Everyone needs to, where we're talking about mental health, there's the meta conversation here. People need to look after themselves and look after their communities. But also if there's a bit of pride there or a bit of, oh, the Green Party isn't quite the perfect party yet. I agree it's not a perfect party, and I'm the deputy leader of it. I don't think we need a perfect party, and I don't think a perfect party is ever coming along. I think what we can have is a party that is broad enough with people who share the same values to say what we are facing at the moment is literal fascism. It is time to organise and get together. And I suppose the one counter argument to that is, some independents have been doing really well, and people who go, well, maybe I'd be happier being independent and not being in a party. Something I say to the independents often, and the independents are people I get on with, so this isn't the kind of beef with the independents. I think some of them are doing amazing work. But I often go, what is it that the Green Party are doing or saying that you disagree with? Because if I know, then that would be really helpful, because I could see if I agree or disagree with you and then work to change it within the party. And I've never really received an answer. Very often the very vague answer is it's about vibes. Like, the party is not working class enough, it's not diverse enough. And you know what? I agree, the party is not working class enough and we're not diverse enough. Very small caveat there that we have many, many working class people in the party and many, many diverse people, including as elected councillors. And so I think when people say there's no representation at all, you are raising the contribution of people who are doing incredible work and who are really facing an uphill struggle to get themselves more represented in the media and in politics. So let's support those people. But the general point is fair enough. I want to see us much more like the communities we seek to represent. Well, that won't happen unless people join the party and unless they get involved with the party. So by actively just saying it and not doing something about it, it is not helping the wider struggle that we need to have. And so I think the best thing people could do is join the Green Party and help us to work to make it better from the inside, to be more representative, to be bolder in our communications, to have to adapt our culture to make sure that it's not a culture that just feels like it's for kind of old school environmentalists who are always very welcome, but also we want to widen up that base too. And I think all of those things are doable, but it requires people to believe in it and to get involved. And that's happening, but I want to see it happening at a much faster pace.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because speaking to young people, as I know you do, it's not that it's not that they've fallen out of love necessarily with politics. They just don't feel like it does anything for them. So instead of voting, they go out and protest and they march, which has value, of course it does, but it can't take the place of actually voting and joining a political party, because that's where change happens. As you rightly said, we marched against the Iraq War, nothing happened. So you have to convince them that actually politics can work. So it's a two-handed thing. You've got to encourage them that the Green Party is the party for them, but in a wider sense, you've got to encourage them that actually politics works and your voice is heard.
I think that's spot on, and I think there's two additions I'd put to that. So the World Transformed were a group of artists that often were at conferences, at the Labour conference under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. They weren't officially aligned to the party. They were kind of a side conference. So you'd have the political conference in one building, and then often in the same city, you'd have this kind of parallel conference, which I would say is much more left-wing, progressive, radical, whatever phrase you wanted to use, and often would incorporate dance and art and music and fun, like the joy, alongside the political discussions and debates to open that out to whole new communities. I think it's phenomenal, and it's something I really want to see the Green Party replicate. My hesitation and the reason why it's not happened yet is entirely a resourcing issue. So when you compare the Green Party's kind of money or pot of money even to the Lib Dems, it is incomparable. We've got kind of 2 or 3 press officers in the Green Party. In the Lib Dems, I think you're probably looking at like 30 to 40. And then that's before you get to kind of the big old 2 parties, Labour Party and Conservative Party, of a Reform Party. They're obviously bankrolled by billionaires. There's something we can do about that, which is fundraising. So this isn't kind of a defeatism. I want to see us raising money for that sort of thing, because I think that sort of thing is important doing in of itself beyond the politics. That's the kind of communities I want to create, our communities coming together to have discussions and create art. But also I think it creates better platforms and discussions for the more formal politics that turns off a lot of people. And so you're creating a bridge between the two things. The second thing has gone out of my mind.
At least we're not recording a podcast, because that would be embarrassing.
Yeah, absolutely. I could make it up. It was more widely around exactly why I think getting communities involved is so important, because we know they're not going to come to a political conference, or maybe they will come to a political conference. And I think that is why we need leadership within those communities to say, hey, come to the conference with me and I'll explain what's going on and make it affordable and accessible for you. But that's a big ask again with money stretched. What I think though is really interesting is this idea of community organising. So under Jeremy Corbyn, there was a community organising unit, which was people coming together in their communities to go, let's self-organise beyond the politics to create demands on the politicians. But the politicians were, particularly Jeremy Corbyn, confident enough in their own platform and in their own self that they knew that they would probably mostly agree with what the communities wanted anyway, because they're there to represent them rather than representing vested interests. So they had no fear of communities organising and gathering together. Even if sometimes it's a slightly different ask, that's a good conversation. But as soon as Keir Starmer became leader, one of the first things he did was abolish the community organising unit. And so one thing I really want to see is more community organising within the Green Party. What that looks like and how we do that on a budget is an open conversation. But I think for me, certainly the intention is absolutely there, because I think there's nothing more important than communities being able to self-organise and to topple over power. So this should not be about power coming down from the top and saying, I'm going to organise you, but ultimately I am your last stop to power. It's ultimately saying, I'm going to help you organise, then I'm going to be with you while you organise, and if at some point you want me to get out of the way, that is a condition, and I'll have to do that.
Can we mention the B word?
Brexit?
The word that no one talks about anymore.
Oh, I didn't know if you literally meant Brexit.
No, that's the B word I meant. I've been so furious for such a long time about this, and many of my friends have been furious. I mean, you know, you're a performer yourself, former actor. The challenges now that my industry is facing is no one's talking about it. People can't tour Europe. I've got musician friends that can't afford to do gigs in Europe. Ordinarily, you know, in previous years, they would have gone to Paris and they would have gone to Spain, and they would have, you know, grown their community and grown their fan base. They're unable to do that now, and nobody's talking about it, and it affects everyday life. I hate using this phrase again. Appetite. Why does it not feel like there's any appetite of anyone to talk about Brexit yet?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think the main thing is that there's no obvious political project to rejoining the European Union again. So I think lots of people who really care about Europe, who are very aligned with European values, go, I can't see exactly how this works. And I include myself in that. I'm someone who can't see a better future outside of the European Union.
There isn't one.
Inside the European Union, exactly. So we need to rejoin. But I can also see that, you know, even the Lib Dems, who were, you know, at one point based their entire platform on rejoining the European Union, just don't seem to talk about it anymore. And when they do talk about it, it's very timid. And then we've got this duopoly of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party that have just, you know, absolutely no interest whatsoever in even rejoining the single market, the customs union, which would be a really good way of making sure we're reducing tariffs on things.
They've washed their hands of it.
Absolutely, agreed entirely. I think there's a more complicated thing here too, and I don't think I've necessarily spoken about this publicly, so let me articulate it properly. But I'm someone who couldn't be more pro-European in terms of exactly everything you just said. As a performer, frequently I'm involved with going to still now to congresses in Europe, in Brussels, where I meet leadership of other Green parties around Europe, and I feel very connected to the sense of solidarity and connection is really, really important in how we work together. And in the same breath, you know, I was outraged at Jeremy Corbyn during the 2019 election, and we've just spoken about Jeremy. So to be very, very clear, there's many, many values I absolutely share, and I think he spoke brilliantly on. I think one big point of disagreement was around Brexit. Now, sometimes you hear people say, you know, you get into a silly argument about how much did he campaign for Brexit? For Remain, how much did he care about it? And people produce videos of him being in places. I'm not even trying to have the discussion about, you know, how much work he did or didn't. The discussion I want to have is how Eurosceptic is he? And I think it's fair to say he is much more Eurosceptic than I was. And I think that was because he looks at Europe and sees a neoliberal organization that's controlled by billionaires, where in those countries, many of which now have right-wing governments, there is a sense that they are a club that are looking to protect each other and not looking to really build common peace, common democracy, to share values that are for the good of the people as opposed to the establishment. Now, so when I voted Remain, that kind of argument really upset me, because we had a Conservative government, and it was very clear to me that a Conservative government weren't going to make some kind of left-wing version of Brexit. And I can understand for Jeremy, he'd been fairly Eurosceptic, or I don't know if he described himself as Eurosceptic, but not pro-European for decades. So that was a very weird moment in time for him to be Labour leader at a moment where the membership and lots of the country wanted him to be more clear about his support for Remain. And so I felt betrayed in that moment that we
Massively.
had a leader of the Labour Party who wasn't being clear about that. I have moved closer to his position. So I'm still very pro-European. If there was a referendum now, I would still absolutely vote Remain. I don't know if it's that I'm paying more attention now. I don't know if it's I'm more politically aware now because I do very clear when all of this was happening, I wasn't an elected politician. So I was a member of the public who was interested, but not deeply involved. But I can now see that the way Europe often works is highly undemocratic, is often highly protecting establishment interests of the richer countries over the poorer countries. That for me is not a reason to leave the European Union. That's a reason even more to get in there, to be a louder, effective voice, a strong voice for fairness and for change. And that's when you have the government we want in this country who drags the rest of Europe in the right direction with the government. I still think it was right to support Remain. I don't regret that at all. So I've not moved that position because we had a Conservative government. I think if we had a socialist government, I think the argument for Remain would have been very different, which would have been, let's Remain because we absolutely need to change Europe. So this is an incredibly complicated conversation because context changes. Europe is not like a fixed institution. What I guess I've become increasingly aware of, though, as I've dealt more and more with Europe or dealt with their values, is that a lot of the things that people worry about or fear in Europe, I think, are absolutely true, which is that it often feels like a club where everyone thinks the same thing. I still absolutely, though, to my core, and I believe Jeremy does, he absolutely does believe in solidarity and organising. And so I think we need an instrument for that in Europe, and we have the European Union, so we're not going to create another one. But I do think it needs massive transformation, and I don't think anyone was really making that argument.
Nobody was
during the referendum. Yeah,
that was the biggest thing, was that nobody. Sorry to interrupt, but nobody was saying. Nobody, I don't think, publicly came out and said, "We're not saying the European Union is perfect. It needs to be fixed. Let's have a seat at the table so we can start to fix it."
Yeah, absolutely, and even more so, I think it's easy for me to backseat drive now. Jeremy was facing like a whole deluge of problems and issues from the media. But I wonder what would have happened if he had come out and said, these are my problems with the European Union, but on balance, this is why we need to Remain. I think that would have been, I can imagine someone who works in comms going, that's a nightmare, do not do that. That's far too nuanced. People will just hear all sorts of things. But I think the biggest problem was just the binary of Remain or Brexit. Yeah. We needed choices on that ballot paper. And once it became Remain or Brexit, everyone lost, I think. And the biggest people who lost was anyone who wanted a sensible, intelligent conversation about nuance. And yeah, I can't remember the question other than I've been thinking a lot about Brexit and about campaigning for a people's vote and how that was heard in working class communities when they'd said the establishment aren't listening to us. I want to be out of Europe. The establishment then told them, no, you need to Remain so everything stays the same. They'd said, no, I want to vote for Brexit because I want to be out of Europe. They voted for Brexit. They felt like their vote actually meant something for the first time. And then suddenly the establishment, and much wider than that, because I'm including myself in this, say, oh, no, you must have made a mistake because you were lied to. Let's have another vote to talk about the conditions of how we leave. Again, I don't, it's a complicated conversation, but I'm reflecting now how that must have felt to people in those communities who already felt betrayed and felt like the establishment was betraying them once again. And I think all of those things have led to where we are with reform. And I think we've got to be very, very cautious about how good intentions or well intentions can be read.
Yeah, I'm sorry to just drop that on you like that.
No. It was I've not spoken about it for a while, so it's good to reflect openly about it on a podcast.
I couldn't not have the deputy leader on of a political party and not ask that question because it's been consuming me for such a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm always curious to find out, because we know where we are economically in this country right now. We're not in a good place. We hear about GDP all the time. We hear about this black hole of money, that trillions of pounds that we're in debt. And it just feels like Brexit is not solely responsible for a lot of it, but it feels like fixing a lot of these problems that we have would be made so much easier if we were still in the EU.
Oh, that I've not changed my mind on at all. Like, I think the arguments again to stay in Europe were so clear. And there are still things we could be doing now to support artists and to support actors and the Erasmus scheme and things like that the Labour government are doing everything they can to shy away from because they're terrified that they're going to get painted as Remainers. And so it feels like they're having some of the reflections that I'm having, but I think they're coming to completely the wrong conclusions, which is, let's not have a difficult conversation. Let's not reflect or admit any mistake or fault. Let's just keep giving the right exactly what they wanted in the first place. Because it also needs to be clear that some of the people who voted Brexit, not all, but some of the people did vote for it for racist reasons, for insular reasons, because they want to be Little Britain and they absolutely do not want to work with our neighbours. And I'm still absolutely, completely confident that that is the wrong way to go. And those are the values that will ultimately lead us to poverty and to human isolation too, because what's nicer than mixing with cultures or experiences that are different to yourself? Also, the very obvious thing too is, the awful irony that migration has gone up after Brexit. It's just that we've taken migration from the rest of the world.
It's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
The biggest campaign for leaving the EU was that we will be in charge of our borders again, and we will shut them down, and they won't. And you're like, we've lost all autonomy of our own country.
Absolutely,
it's wild.
I guess I can sum up everything I've just said with, there's a campaign called Another Europe is Possible. And I think there is, just in that phrase alone, there is so much in that, which is saying, what does the future of the European look like? A European Union, which is not just saying, oh, we agree with everything the European does, it's perfect, let's rejoin. It's saying, let's rejoin and let's reform it. Now, obviously, the huge problem is, do Europe want us back? And do they want us back if we're saying, oh, by the way, we're coming back, but we're reforming you? They probably understandably go, piss off. We don't want you back. So when I said there's no obvious political appetite, I guess it's because we've partly not answered that question. What I do believe, and I hope, is that across Europe, we will see, in the way that we've seen a move to the right across European governments, I'm hoping at some point we will see a spark of left-wing socialist movements in countries where people want to see a different Europe too. And if that happens in this country at the same time, we have this amazing, powerful moment where people can come together and build another Europe. But there's a lot of ifs there.
Yeah.
And then all we can really do is create the conditions for it to happen in this country and work with our European neighbours to help them and show solidarity to them. But, everything has to fall in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, exactly that. And I just hope things don't get too bad before we get to that stage. I hope it's not a case of, it can't get any worse, so let's try and get a socialist government, or let's try and look to rejoin the EU because everything's fucked. That I don't want to get to that stage. I'd really like us to take a step back before we get there.
Yeah, I think we're pretty close.
I know, I agree. And you're right to mention the other countries as well, Italy and places like that. Yeah. It's just it's terrifying.
Absolutely.
And I'm not ignorant enough to not understand why people are moving to the right. I understand it. They're scared and they're poor, and they don't feel like they've got any opportunity, and they can't afford to go on a holiday, and they can't afford to feed the children. And you've got, right-wing media and these politicians, as you say, backed by oligarchs and billionaires, backing them, saying, well, we're the solution. I do get it. It's not because I'm painting people as ignorant or stupid. It makes perfect sense to me, and one of the things that I want to speak about before I let you go, because I know you're a very busy man, is the mental health crisis in this country. It feels like a political choice. We're not tackling the root causes. We're pouring fuel onto the fire. We have all the we have all the opportunities available in this country. We have everybody should be able to see a doctor. Everybody should be able to go and get their mental health seen to. I have a friend, bless him, who is riddled with the most horrendous ADHD and has been for years. He's in the top 6% of people in the country for ADHD, and it affects him on a human level every single day. And it's taken him 2 years to get an appointment. It took him another year to get diagnosed, and then he made a mistake on a form and got kicked off and had to start again. And you're like, this system is killing people. One man every minute is killing themselves, and it feels like a political choice.
Yeah, I hear stories like this all the time, and these are political choices. I used to say that mental health needs to be treated as serious as physical health, and I agree with that, but we also know that physical health isn't being treated particularly seriously either. These are all political choices, and we're recording this on a day where the government are choosing to cut disability benefits from some of the most severely disabled people in the country, at the same time as they're protecting the wealth of multimillionaires and billionaires. People often say, but won't the billionaires leave? Well, one, that's not really how wealth works. People spend their money or have houses in this country because they love this country, hopefully, or they have culture or art or family or history here. So that's one thing. But second, if a wealthy person is just investing in wealth to make more wealth for themselves, is that really benefiting our country? Is that helping our mental health services? No, it's not. So I think we should be much more confident and bolder in saying, see you, out the door you go. We hear this constant idea of there's no alternative. It came from Thatcher, Tina, and we're hearing it over and over again from Rachel Reeves. What's even more scornful, I think, is that she admits, because she has to, these are self-imposed fiscal rules. So the choice to not invest in mental health services is because she's made up some rules. The choice not to invest in local youth services, which are a preventative service before you even get to mental health services, is because of these fiscal rules. And the choice to not invest in teachers or role models in communities who could also, again, be picking up mental health crises before they get worse is, again, because of these self-imposed fiscal rules. She could drop these fiscal rules. They are simply a signaling mechanism to power and wealth and to the banks to say, don't worry, you're going to keep making more money, and don't worry, we're not going to invest in communities. I think there's a second darker thing here, which I think your question kind of alluded to, which is if you have a healthy population who are thinking right, who are able to educate themselves and able to organize, they are a threat to power because they're really clear about what they're seeing and they're able to organize to overthrow power. And I'm talking about the electoral level. If the communities who most need that change are struggling because their leaders or their people who could be leaders are struggling to even get out of bed in the morning or to just get through the day and survive because of thoughts they're having, of the experience they're having, both through their physical and mental health, then that suppresses resistance, it suppresses revolution, quite frankly. It suppresses any kind of political change because people are just trying to get through the day. Now, do I think Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are sat there, plotting in that kind of Machiavellian detail? No, I don't think so. But I think the people who fund them, the people who organize them, and the people who are often making the decisions absolutely are operating on that wavelength in terms of the thing they really do not want is active communities who are able to gather and organize together because they know how devastating that would be. And I suppose one example I can give that's much more practical, but then relate it to mental health is my colleague Sean Berry did amazing work. She's now the MP for Brighton on estates. So when estates are going to be demolished by developers, the people on the estates never used to get a say whatsoever in the fact that home was going to be destroyed. It was going to be redeveloped, so it was going to be nicer for them. They often maybe wouldn't even be living there afterwards. They'd probably be commuted out of or shipped out of the main city and live somewhere else, not nearly as nice and ripped apart from their community and family. And Sean's argument was that they should be balloted. So the people in these estates should all get a choice whether they vote yes or no. And so she managed to win that. Excellent. But what very quickly happened is developers would then swoop in on the estate with huge propaganda campaigns, tell everyone what they were going to get, why this was going to be great for them, and kind of lobby them very, very heavily. And so I think there was one example over years where the ballot didn't go the developer's way. Developers just kept winning ballot after ballot. So then she argued for a resident empowerment fund, which was a small pot of money for residents on estates to hire a community hall, to hire a notice board and come together in their community to put a campaign together if they didn't want it to be demolished, so they could match the developers at some level, obviously not even nearly in the kind of power and wealth, but just so the conversation has a bit more equity. And that was shot down so many times by politicians and by developers because there's just this sense that they don't want people having power and agency. And so whether it's the mental health crisis, whether it's people organizing in their communities, I think the biggest thing we have on our side is those people who do feel able to advocate for the people who can't or aren't able to for whatever reason, to say, I hear your pain and I feel your pain. And if you need to check out, for the moment, that's totally understandable. Ultimately, the first thing we should be looking after is our own health. But for those of us who can do, and that's not a binary, sometimes you'll be able to do it some days and other days you might need some space to check your own kind of health. But being able to advocate for those people and being able to be there to support them, hold them up and create a safety net is a really powerful form of politics that our communities really need.
I've never heard anything put like that before. I'm really shocked and I'm really quite upset about that. I feel really angry. I feel really, really angry about that. Just to go back on something you said there are companies funding governments who don't want the electorate to be fit, healthy, and have working mental health because they see them as a threat. And that is perpetuated by governments, maybe not publicly and maybe not in black and white, but that is an unspoken agenda that
Yeah, I think I can be
exists.
even more explicit than that. So let's talk about gambling. Like, one of the worst things for people's mental health
It's
is,
everywhere.
yeah, lots and lots of evidence about what it does to people's mental health, the spiral of addiction that can create when people gamble problematically. And of course, the vast majority of people who gamble, who have problematic behaviors around gambling, are already living in poverty. So, in terms of a mental health crisis, a poverty crisis, there's probably, I can't think of many more clear things than gambling. You can have a whole libertarian argument about whether gambling should be allowed or not, and probably fall on the side of people should have a free choice of what they want to do with their money. But then we look at the aggressive advertising, the aggressive targeting of poor people, the gambling shops that are put on high streets next to the chicken shop
Oh,
that are right by the estate, they're very deliberately put there. And then the amount that the gambling companies donate to politicians, including Labour Party politicians, who are taking money from gambling companies, who are then making decisions about the regulation of gambling companies, knowing what an effect this is having to people's mental health, and also knowing if it's interesting when you just said you were angry. I don't know if I'm joining too many things here, but I think it's right that all of us feel anger at points. There's lots to be angry about. I'm also someone who I think if we just sit in anger, we end up in mental health crises of our own, and actually we've got to turn that anger into tangible action that's hopeful. But without missing the anger, I think you have to feel it. Otherwise, the hope just becomes a very abstract kind of thing, like what are you hopeful for? But I think lots of angry people or frustrated people are gambling because they're angry at the system. They want to get out of it. I think, what did I just see on YouTube? Beast Games. I'm probably going into a completely different other thing. That YouTube series based on Squid Games. I probably watched 10 minutes out of it out of morbid curiosity, and just seeing people who are living in poverty, lots of them talking about how they're on this game to win money. I mean, it's no different than Pop Idol or X Factor, of where they would tell those sob stories of people who want to change their life conditions, knowing it's not a replicable strategy for the vast majority of people to have to go on a competition to sell their life story and their trauma to possibly get this 1 in a million, probably more than that, chance to then lift themselves out of the circumstances. But people, when they gamble, are doing the same thing, just in a different way that doesn't involve singing, but hoping they're going to get themselves out of their poverty. And so a lot of those gambling behaviors come from that frustration and that anger. How much more powerful would it be if we could reach those people, if they weren't being fed those aggressive propaganda about gambling, and going, that anger you're feeling and that frustration, turn up to this community meeting, go knock on that door, go get people voting, go get things to change. That would be transformational, and that would be how to organise the entire country, particularly the people who most need this change. But actually, the people who most need this change are frequently and totally understandably just trying to get through the day.
can we not? Is there no way of changing the rules on things like this? I'm sorry, I'm speaking really. I sound a bit ignorant here, but for a Labour government to be saying in one breath that we care about your mental health, and we know we need to get NHS waiting lists down, and we want to get more psychotherapists available to the general public, and all of this sort of tripe, and then taking money off gambling companies and lobbyists and putting. I'm from Staffordshire originally, and in Stoke-on-Trent, near where I grew up, Stoke-on-Trent's fallen to pieces. It's absolutely fallen to bits. Every shop is boarded up. The only thing that exists are bookies and pubs. How we have to change the rules. They can't be allowed to. You can't have gambling companies lobbying governments. That's insane. In the same breath as saying that you care about people's mental health, you're a fucking hypocrite.
I think Stoke-on-Trent, by the way, is a microcosm of everything we've been talking about. I agree entirely, just the way it's been treated by politicians, and there's been a breeding ground often for the far right for these exact reasons, because the conditions are created. People feel completely unhappy, and then the far right swoop in. Also, I believe is there a huge multiplex being built there, or some huge entertainment? It's like an O2 that is being built there, and the politicians have all been arguing this will be good for the local economy and the local community. And I'm like, that is a private company that is taking all that space that could have been local businesses, that could have been community centres, to create a huge entertainment corporate value where people will swoop in to perform, who often aren't paying tax properly, or the companies who hire them aren't paying tax properly. They will then leave again. It's right by the train station, so no one's going to go to the local economy and shop. And just the idea that local working people are not, out of work people, that's going to be good for them, is outrageous. Back to your point, though, there's an amazing campaigner called Matt Zarb Cousins. He was working with Jeremy Corbyn when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. He's now joined the Green Party, which I'm very happy to have Matt in the party. But also he is really involved with an organisation whose name escapes me. This is frustrating. But an organisation that is working on exactly this around gambling regulation and bringing up the agenda. But if you type Matt Zarb Cousins and gambling, it will come up, and people should find that. I really think that gambling really needs amplification. How damaging this is to people. I'm using gambling as an example, but also you could say the same about oil and gas companies. The fact that you can travel on an underground or a metro system, and there are constant, like in Westminster. This annoys me probably more than anything else. When you go to the Houses of Parliament as you come up the tube, there is a huge advert for BAE armed weapon systems. And I just think that every MP who is travelling on the tube, although I'm sure lots of them are being chauffeured around, but one of the last things they're seeing before they step off the tube is an advertisement for military and arms weapons. And it's not surprising then that we have the politicians that we do that are so frequently xenophobic or jingoistic about being really keen to get to war as soon as possible, as opposed to having really serious and urgent conversations about peace and diplomacy.
It's quite broken, isn't it?
Very broken. But this is where I am going to do the hope.
Come on. We've had enough now. Let's get onto some hope.
I mean, the hope is quite simple, and it's implicit in everything we're saying. It's just, I just realized I was going to quote Michelle Obama from the last campaign, which is probably a bad idea with the result. But I think, the slogan was right. She said, do something. She was like, we've got to stop complaining about things, and we've got to, it's perfectly legitimate to complain. Let me be clear about that. And the people have lots to complain about. But if we are just complaining when we could be doing something, when we could be joining a community group, obviously I would say join the Green Party. And I would even say, though, if I'm being, more open than that, joining the Green Party is one aspect of it, but actually joining your local community group, joining an organising group is really important. I should say, for people who are thinking about joining the Green Party but feel like it's not bold enough, there's an internal group within the Green Party called Greens Organise. You can find them on Instagram or most social media. They're a group of people within the party, but also I think some people who aren't in the party, who are saying, let's talk about what a bigger vision could be, a more ambitious vision. And so I would say if people are not quite ready for the Green Party, but are leaning that way, Greens Organise is a really, really good landing point for them. But I think this is ultimately the answer, is to get organised. I'm really inspired by what we're seeing in America right now with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, and Bernie Sanders. They are going around, they're having these rallies, and I'm also deeply frustrated because I'm like, where was this a few months ago? Like when we had Kamala Harris delivering these very bland, centrist, if not right of centre campaigns. Undoubtedly she'd be better than Trump, all of those arguments, but still, even under Joe Biden, more oil and gas was extracted than under any American president before. So she was this, we're back to the Brexit conversation, I guess, a continuation of the establishment. And AOC, to some point, got on board with that project. This is not a huge criticism. I can understand she felt like, what choice do I have? I either don't campaign or I campaign for the candidate we've got. But anyway, all of that aside, I'm really pleased that they are in this moment not retreating, not disappearing, but actually going, this is the moment for people power, and they're touring to challenge the oligarchy. And from all the videos and images I've seen, it looks incredible. And so again, that gives me hope that ultimately we know these messages are popular. There are more of us than there are of the people who are seeking to control and to suppress movements. And so we've just got to get organised.
You're really good at this, aren't you?
I hope so, but actually, this is probably the most politician-y thing I say, but we are all really good at this. It's giving people the space and time to have a microphone to speak and to think. And I don't think I'm saying anything that is magical or not obvious in some ways. I think what we all need to do is to speak our truth, to have a perspective and a point of view, and to not get distracted by lies.
You speak with such clarity and honesty and passion, and that is something that, for me at least, is been quite rare in politics. And the hope that you talk about, I want people to take that away from this episode of the podcast. I want people to feel hopeful, but I echo everything you've said. I hope you've lit a fire in people, because you certainly lit a fire in me, mate. I'm absolutely on board. I want people to go out. I want people to vote. I want them to organise. I want them to volunteer, because ultimately change doesn't come from waiting around. It comes from acting.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked a lot about vested interests in this podcast. Green Party have two vested interests: the people and the planet. And I think when you're looking to defend people and the planet, you've got nothing to lie about. So when you speak, it can flow a lot easier, because you're not worrying about being tripped up or the next lie you're having to tell. You're able to just communicate from the heart. And that's me, but I would say it's anyone who's working or campaigning for the Green Party, because you're speaking for people and the planet. So it's time to speak.
Thank you so much for coming on, mate. It's been a real
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Honour. Thank you.